Most farmers walk into a dealership looking for answers. Mark Holden walked in looking for a fight. It was the second Saturday in March 2024. Peak showroom traffic. Families comparing cab features. Retired operators debating 8R versus 9R platforms. The kind of morning where a John Deere dealership feels like the center of the agricultural universe. And Mark Holden, 46 years old, plows 1,800 acres of corn and beans in south-central Iowa, pulled his 2-year-old Massey Ferguson 7S.210 straight into their front row, not in the guest parking, not in the service lane, right in front of the main entrance. Red paint, chrome exhaust, Massey Ferguson decals at full scale. He shut it down, climbed out, and walked inside carrying a black 3-ring binder under his arm. The showroom went quiet. Mark didn't stop at the receptionist. He didn't wait for a salesperson to greet him. He walked straight to the sales manager's desk in the back corner of the showroom, a glass-walled office with a view of the entire floor, and knocked on the open door. "I need a trade evaluation." The sales manager, a man named Rick Thornton, looked up from his computer. He was 52, 26 years at that dealership. He'd seen farmers angry, desperate, confused. He'd never seen one walk in like this. On what? Mark set the binder on the desk. "The Massey, sitting in your front row." Rick leaned back in his chair. He glanced out the window at the red tractor parked under the dealership awning. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Rick smiled, not warmly. "All right, let me get someone to take a look at it." "No." Mark opened the binder. "I want you to evaluate it, right here, right now, in front of everyone." Rick's smile faded. Here's what most people didn't understand about Mark Holden. He wasn't impulsive, he wasn't reckless, he was meticulous, and for the last 2 years he'd been documenting everything. Spring of 2022, Mark bought that Massey Ferguson 7210 brand new. 210 horsepower. Dyna VT continuously variable transmission. Massey Ferguson's advanced hydraulic system with independent flow rates. Full precision package. Leather cab, suspension seat. Dealer invoice, $287,400. He financed it at 4.8% over 7 years. At the time, it felt like the smartest move he'd ever made. His old tractor, a 2011 John Deere 7230R, was paid off, but it was burning oil, the hydraulics were sluggish, and the cab suspension was shot. He was running 1,800 acres. He needed reliability. He needed modern precision. He needed something that could handle high-speed planting and heavy tillage without overheating. The Massey Ferguson dealer showed him flow rate specs. 45 gallons per minute on the main hydraulic pump, split flow capability, independent rear remotes. The salesman said, "You'll never wait on hydraulics again." Mark believed him. He traded in the Deere. He drove that Massey Ferguson home on a Tuesday afternoon in late March, and for the first 6 months, he loved it. It pulled like a freight train. The cab was quiet. The CVT transmission was smooth. But by fall, by the time he was running a 12-row planter and a 2,500-gallon liquid fertilizer cart, he started noticing something. The hydraulics weren't keeping up. It wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't a failure. It was lag. When he raised the planter, the hydraulics took 3 seconds longer than they should have. When he adjusted the down pressure on the row units, there was a delay. When he tried to extend the markers while still rolling, the system hesitated. Mark checked the fluid. Clean. He checked the filters. New. He called the Massey Ferguson dealer. They told him it was normal. CVT systems draw hydraulic power for transmission cooling. You're within spec. Mark asked, "What's the flow rate when the CVT is under load?" The service writer didn't know. Mark started testing it himself. He installed a digital flow meter on the main hydraulic line. He ran the tractor through field conditions, planting, tillage, heavy draft load, high-speed transport, and he documented everything. Under normal operation, 42 GPM. Under CVT load during heavy draft, 34 GPM. Under combined load, planting at 6.2 miles per hour with a 2,500-gallon cart, 28 GPM. The marketing material said 45 GPM. The real-world number was 28. That's a 38% reduction. Mark wasn't angry yet, he was confused. He called the dealership again. They said that's how the system is designed. The CVT and the hydraulics share the same pump. Mark said, "Then why does the brochure say 45? The service manager said that's peak flow, not sustained. Mark hung up, and that's when he started comparing. Mark did something most farmers don't do. He called his neighbors, not to complain, to collect data. His neighbor to the east, Jerry Voss, ran a John Deere 8370R, 370 horsepower, mechanical transmission, separate hydraulic pump. Mark asked if he could test the hydraulics. Jerry said sure. Mark hooked up his flow meter. Under full load, 12-row planter, 3,000-gallon cart, 6 miles per hour, the Deere held 52 GPM, consistent, no drop. His neighbor to the west, Tom Erickson, ran a Case IH Magnum 340, CVT transmission. Mark tested it. Under full load, 48 GPM, slight drop, but not 38%. Mark went home and opened a spreadsheet. He listed every brand, every model, every hydraulic flow rate under real-world conditions. John Deere 8R Series, 50-54 GPM sustained. Case IH Magnum, 46-50 GPM sustained. New Holland T8, 44-48 GPM sustained. Massey Ferguson 7S Part 10, 28-34 GPM sustained. The numbers didn't lie. Mark had bought the most expensive tractor he'd ever owned, and it had the weakest hydraulic system in its class. He called the Massey Ferguson dealer one more time. They offered to optimize the settings. He brought the tractor in. They adjusted the software. It didn't change anything. Mark asked if he could trade it. The dealer said, "You're 2 years in. You're upside down on the loan. We can't help you." Mark asked, "How much am I upside down?" The dealer ran the numbers. Trade-in value, $198,000. Loan balance, $251,600. Mark would need to bring $53,600 cash to the table just to break even. He didn't have it. He was stuck. For 6 months, Mark lived with it. He planted, he sprayed. He ran that Massey Ferguson through 1,800 acres of Iowa corn and beans, and every single day he felt the hydraulic lag. Every single day he watched his neighbors running Deere and Case equipment with no hesitation, no delay, no compromise. And every single day he got angrier. Not at the machine, at the system. At the dealership that sold him on specs that didn't match reality. At the marketing material that promised 45 GPM and delivered 28. At the sales culture that prioritized the sale over the truth. By February 2024, Mark had made a decision. If he couldn't trade out of the Massey Ferguson, he was going to make sure every farmer in his county knew exactly what they were buying. That's what brought him to the John Deere dealership on a Saturday morning in March. Rick Thornton leaned forward and looked at the binder on his desk. "What is this?" Mark opened it. Inside were printed spreadsheets, hydraulic flow data, fuel consumption logs, maintenance invoices, comparison charts. "This is 2 years of documented performance data on my Massey Ferguson 7S.2110. And this," he flipped to a tabbed section, "is comparison data from 6 other tractors in my area, including 3 of your 8R models." Rick didn't touch the binder. "I don't need to see this. If you want to trade a Val, I'll send someone out to look at the tractor." "No," Mark's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. "You're going to evaluate it right here, and you're going to explain to me why a $287,000 Massey Ferguson has worse hydraulic performance than a $310,000 John Deere." Rick smiled, the same cold smile. "Because Massey Ferguson isn't John Deere." The words hung in the air. Mark stared at him. "Say that again." Rick leaned back. "Look, I'm not trying to insult you, but you bought a Massey. That's a niche brand. They're good for certain applications. But if you want John Deere performance, you buy John Deere." Mark didn't blink. "Is that what you tell every farmer who walks in here?" "I tell them the truth." Mark reached into the binder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He set it on the desk between them. It was a comparison chart. Massey Ferguson 7S.210 versus John Deere 8R310. Horsepower 210 versus 310. Deere wins. Hydraulic flow advertised 45 GPM versus 50 GPM. Deere wins. Hydraulic flow measured under load 28 GPM versus 52 GPM. Deere dominates. Fuel consumption gallons per acre 0.87 versus 0.74. Deere wins. Price as test 287 versus 310,000. Mark tapped the paper. The Deere costs $22,600 more, but it burns less fuel, delivers 86% more hydraulic capacity under load, and holds resale value better. Over 7 years, the Deere is cheaper to own. Rick looked at the paper. He didn't argue. Mark continued. "So when you say Massey Ferguson isn't John Deere, you're right, but not the way you think. Massey sold me a machine based on specs that don't exist in real-world use. And now I'm upside down $53,000 because your competitor lied. Rick's jaw tightened. That's not my problem. It is now. Mark picked up the binder. Because I'm not leaving until you evaluate that tractor in front of your customers, and I'm going to read these numbers out loud while you do it. Rick stood up. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Mark didn't move. Are you refusing to provide a trade evaluation? Rick hesitated. Because legally, he couldn't refuse. Trade evaluations are standard practice. Public showroom hours. Mark was a customer. He had a machine. He had a loan. He had every right to ask for a number. Rick knew it. Mark knew it. And everyone in the showroom, now watching through the glass office walls, knew it too. Rick exhaled. Fine, I'll get someone to take a look. No, Mark said. You're going to take a look right now. Rick Thornton walked outside. Mark followed. And so did half the showroom. By the time Rick reached the Massey Ferguson, there were 15 people standing in a loose semicircle around it. Families, retirees, a couple of salespeople. Rick opened the cab door and climbed in. Mark stood at the base of the steps, binder in hand. Engine hours? Mark opened the binder to a logged page. 1,847 hours, all documented. Oil changed every 200 hours, filters on schedule, no engine lights, no mechanical issues. Rick started the tractor. It fired immediately. Smooth idle, no smoke. He let it run for 30 seconds, then climbed out. Exterior condition? Mark gestured. You can see for yourself. No dents. No damage, tires at 60%, front weights included. Rick walked around the tractor slowly. The paint was clean, the decals were intact, the sheet metal was straight. It looked like a dealership demo unit. Rick came back to the front. What are you asking for it? Mark didn't hesitate. I want fair market value, which is, you tell me. Rick pulled out his phone. He opened a dealer trade-in app. He entered the model, year, hours, condition. The app returned a number. Rick looked at it. He didn't say anything. Mark asked, what does it say? Rick hesitated. $205,000. The crowd murmured. Mark opened his binder. He showed Rick his loan statement. My payoff is $251,600. That means I need to bring $46,600 cash just to trade even. Does that sound fair to you? Rick didn't answer. Mark raised his voice slightly, not shouting but projecting. I paid $287,000 for this tractor 2 years ago. I've put less than 2,000 hours on it. I've maintained it perfectly, and I've lost $82,000 in value. He turned to the crowd. That's a 28.5% depreciation in 24 months. Does anyone here think that's normal? An older man in the crowd, a retired farmer in a John Deere hat, spoke up. What'd you pay new? $287,400. And it's worth $205,000 now? According to their system. The old man shook his head. That's terrible, Rick interrupted. That's market rate for a used Massey Ferguson. Mark turned back to him. Exactly. Because Massey Ferguson doesn't hold value, because the hydraulics don't perform, because farmers who buy them realize too late that the specs don't match the field. Rick's face flushed. You're making accusations, Mark cut him off. I'm reading data. He opened the binder to the comparison chart. Massey Ferguson advertises 45 gallons per minute of hydraulic flow. Under real-world load, this tractor delivers 28. That's a 38% reduction. Your John Deere 8R.310 advertises 50 GPM and delivers 52 under the same load. That's a 4% increase. Someone in the crowd asked, how do you know? Mark held up the chart. Because I tested it. I installed a flow meter. I documented every scenario. Planting, tillage, heavy draft. And I tested 6 other tractors from neighbors in my area. He pointed at Rick. The Deere outperforms its own specs. The Massey underperforms by 40%. The crowd was silent. Rick tried to recover. Different machines are designed for different applications. This machine was designed to compete with the 8R310, Mark said. That's what the Massey Ferguson dealer told me. That's how they sold it, and it doesn't compete. It loses badly. Rick had no response. Mark closed the binder. So here's what I want. I want you to take this tractor on trade. I want you to give me $205,000 toward a John Deere 8R310, and I want you to explain to Massey Ferguson why one of their customers is standing in your parking lot doing this. Rick shook his head. I can't take a Massey on trade. We're a John Deere dealership. You take trades from other brands all the time. Not red iron. Why not? Rick lowered his voice. Because nobody wants it. The words echoed. Mark stared at him. Say that again, louder. Rick didn't. Mark turned to the crowd. He just told you the truth. John Deere dealerships won't take Massey Ferguson tractors on trade because nobody wants them. And you know why? Because they don't perform. The crowd started talking among themselves. Some were nodding, some were pulling out their phones. Rick Thornton was trapped. He couldn't deny what Mark had said. He couldn't refute the data. And he couldn't make Mark leave without causing a bigger scene. So he tried a different approach. Look, Mark, I understand you're frustrated, but this isn't the right way to handle this. Mark's expression didn't change. What's the right way? Talk to your Massey dealer. Work it out with them. I tried. They told me I'm upside down and there's nothing they can do. Then maybe you need to accept that. Mark shook his head. No, I need farmers to know the truth before they make the same mistake I did. He turned back to the crowd. How many of you are shopping for a tractor right now? 3 hands went up. Mark walked toward them. Before you sign anything from any brand, ask to see real-world hydraulic flow data, not the brochure, not the sales pitch, actual measured GPM under load. He held up his binder, because if you don't, you'll end up like me, upside down, stuck, and angry. One of the men with his hand raised asked, You really measured all this yourself? Every number in here, 2 years of field data. Can I see it? Mark handed him the binder. The man flipped through it slowly. His eyes widened. This is detailed. It has to be, because nobody else is telling you the truth. Another man stepped forward. I almost bought a Massey last year. Dealer said the hydraulics were the best in the class. Mark looked at him. Did they show you flow rates under CVT load? No. Did they explain that the transmission and the hydraulics share the same pump? No. Mark nodded. That's the problem. They sell you on peak specs, and you don't find out the truth until you're 6 months into planting season, and the hydraulics are lagging behind your planter. The man nodded slowly. I went with a case instead. Smart move. Rick stepped forward. All right, that's enough. Mark, you've made your point, but you need to leave now. Mark turned to him. I'll leave when you give me a trade number I can work with. I already told you. $205,000 isn't a trade number. That's an insult. Rick's voice hardened. That's the market. Then the market is broken. Mark picked up his binder from the man in the crowd. I'll make this simple. You give me $230,000 for this tractor, and I'll take an 8R310 off your lot today. Right now. We'll do the paperwork in front of everyone. Rick laughed. Not a friendly laugh, a dismissive one. You're asking me to eat $25,000 just to make you feel better? No, I'm asking you to acknowledge that Massey Ferguson lied to me, and you're benefiting from it. The accusation landed hard. Rick's face went red. I didn't sell you that tractor, but you're profiting from the fact that I can't trade it, because your brand holds value and mine doesn't. Rick pointed at the Massey Ferguson. That's not my fault, but it's your advantage. Silence. Mark let the words sit. Then he said, I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for fairness. And if you won't give it to me, I'll stand here every Saturday until you do. Rick stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. Rick Thornton made a decision. He pulled out his phone. He called his general manager. The GM arrived 10 minutes later. His name was Paul Hendricks, 60 years old. He'd been in the equipment business for 40 years. He walked outside, looked at the Massey Ferguson, looked at the crowd, and looked at Mark. You're the guy with the binder. That's me. Paul held out his hand. Let me see it. Mark handed it over. Paul opened it. He read for 2 minutes. He didn't say anything. Then he closed it and handed it back. You're right. Mark blinked. What? You're right. The Massey underperforms. The data's solid, and you got sold a machine that doesn't do what it's supposed to. Rick started to protest. Paul held up a hand. I'm not saying we caused it, but he's right. He turned to Mark. Here's what I'll do. I'll give you $220,000 for the Massey. You bring $31,600 to close the gap on your loan, and I'll sell you an 8R310 at dealer cost. Mark hesitated. What's dealer cost? $287,000, no markup. Mark did the math in his head. Trade, $220,000. Loan payoff, $251,600. Gap, $31,600. New tractor, $287,000. Total out of pocket, $318,006. But he'd be in a machine that actually performed. He'd be out from under the Massey, and he'd be in a Deere that would hold value. Mark looked at Paul. Why are you doing this? Paul didn't smile. Because you're making a scene, and if I don't deal with you now, you'll be back next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and eventually it'll cost me more in lost sales than $25,000. He wasn't being kind. He was being practical. Mark respected that. Deal. They shook hands. It took 3 hours to finalize everything. Mark had to wire $31,600 from his operating account. He had to sign new loan documents at 5.4% interest. He had to sit through a sales pitch on extended warranties. He declined. But by 2:30 p.m. that same afternoon, Mark Holden drove off the John Deere lot in a brand new 8R.310, 370 horsepower, mechanical transmission, separate hydraulic pump, 54 gallons per minute, sustained. He left the Massey Ferguson sitting in the dealer's back lot, red paint gleaming under the March sun, waiting for someone else to make the same mistake. By April, Mark was back in the field. Same 1,800 acres, same 12-row planter, same 20,500-gallon fertilizer cart. But everything was different. The hydraulics responded instantly. No lag, no delay, no compromise. When he raised the planter, it lifted in under 2 seconds. When he adjusted down pressure, the system reacted immediately. When he pushed the Deere to 6.5 miles per hour with a full load, the hydraulics never dropped below 52 GPM. Mark didn't talk about it. He didn't brag. He just worked. But word spread. By mid-April, every farmer in the county knew the story. The guy who drove a Massey Ferguson onto the John Deere lot. The guy who pulled out a binder full of data. The guy who made a dealership GM eat $25,000 just to make him go away. Some called him obsessive. Some called him crazy. But most called him right. Because 3 other farmers in that county were running Massey Fergusons. And all 3 started asking the same questions Mark had asked. What's the real hydraulic flow under load? Why does the CVT steal power from the hydraulics? Why didn't the dealer tell us this? One of them, a farmer named Steve Keller, drove his Massey Ferguson 8S back to the dealer and demanded a trade evaluation. The dealer refused. Steve called Mark. Mark sent him the binder. Steve took it to the dealership, opened it on the sales manager's desk, and said, "Explain this." The dealer couldn't. Steve traded into a Case IH Magnum. By fall harvest, the impact was measurable. At the October consignment auction in Worth County, a 2022 Massey Ferguson 7S 180 rolled across the block. 1,200 hours. Excellent condition, full precision package. The auctioneer opened at $210,000. No bids. He dropped to $195,000. One bid. He dropped to $180,000. No counter. The tractor sold for $182,000. Original price, $265,000. 2-year depreciation, 31%. The auctioneer didn't comment, but everyone knew why. Mark Holden never regretted the decision, not the $31,600 he had to bring to the table, not the 3-hour standoff in the John Deere parking lot, not the reputation he earned as the guy with the binder. Because here's what he learned. Farm equipment companies sell dreams. Horsepower, technology, precision, efficiency. But they don't sell truth, they sell brochures. And if you don't demand proof, real-world, documented, measurable proof, you'll end up paying for a machine that can't deliver what it promised. Mark ran that John Deere 8R310 for 2 full seasons, 3,600 acres each year. The hydraulics never lagged. The fuel consumption stayed consistent. The resale value held. And when he finally traded it in, 3 years later, 2,400 hours on the clock, the dealer gave him $278,000. He'd paid $287,000. He lost $9,000 over 3 years. That's 3% depreciation. The Massey Ferguson lost 28.5% in 2 years. The math doesn't lie. On a Saturday morning in March 2024, a farmer walked into a John Deere dealership with a binder and a Massey Ferguson. He didn't leave until he got answers. And he made sure every farmer in his county heard them. Some called it obsessive. Some called it unnecessary. But Mark Holden called it the only way to survive in an industry that profits from your ignorance. He drove that red Massey Ferguson straight into enemy territory, and he didn't back down until the numbers proved him right. The dealership laughed until he started comparing flow rates.